Yeah, it's funny when you ask what role are humans left with. It reminds me of what people probably asked when electricity came about, and somebody said, what role are lamplighters left with? To truly get truth and to understand whether something's a good idea or not, you have to be really careful and thoughtful about how you ask about it, how you validate it, and take your ego out of it and be willing to say, okay, it's a dumb idea, let's move on, not wed yourself to the first technically sophisticated thing you built.
Welcome to Building with AI, a show where we host conversations with world-class business leaders in AI to uncover advice that helps you build and scale better AI products. I'm your host, Haroon Choudery. Today, I'm joined by Dan Siroker, co-founder and CEO of Rewind. Rewind is using AI to aid our memory. It works as a personal time machine, effectively giving everyone a photographic memory. During our conversation, Dan and I chat about his incredible journey leading up to Rewind, how Rewind uses AI today, the future of AI, and, you guessed it, Rewind Pendant. Before we dig in, a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Autoblocks, the AI optimization platform product teams use to create world-class AI experiences. So, you just launched V0 of your AI feature or product. What's next? Autoblocks unlocks an intuitive yet powerful optimization workflow that helps you continuously understand, improve, differentiate your AI-powered products. Understand how your users interact with your product by connecting user activity to what's happening under the hood of your application. Improve your product thoughtfully and iteratively. Integrate testing of your AI products into your CI workflow and run A/B tests to see what changes are driving great user outcomes. Differentiate your AI products with powerful fine-tuning workflow that lets you turn product usage data into training data. Get started with Autoblocks for free at autoblocks.ai. Now, back to the episode. Awesome. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what Rewind does?
So my background, actually, in my 20s, I started to go deaf, and I tried a hearing aid, and it was magical. To lose a sense and gain it back again felt like gaining a superpower. So ever since that moment, I've been on a hunt for ways that technology can augment human capabilities and give us superpowers. That's what led me to Rewind. Rewind is a personalized AI powered by everything you say and hear. It stores it all locally. We launched on the Mac. We have now a product on iPhone and soon Windows. And it stores it all locally so that you can search anything you've seen in your past, anything you've heard, and also ask any question. We integrate with large language models to actually be able to write an email for you or summarize a meeting or anything that the power of a large language model can do, you can now apply to your personalized data.
Amazing. Your story is incredible. Also, just awesome to see how nicely it dovetails with the product that you're building at Rewind. Your background is also really interesting. So I'm interested to dig into that a little bit more. So you were a former PM at Google. You then were director of analytics, I believe, for Obama for America. And then you were CEO, co-founder at Optimizely for over a decade. Can you walk me through your background and especially in the context of how it led you to starting Rewind?
Like you said, I started my career at Google. I was a product manager there as part of what they called the Associate Product Management Program. And I joined Google really because I wanted to learn the skills that would make me successful as an entrepreneur on my own. I actually didn't learn that. I spent 80% of the things I learned were about how to navigate Google. And at the time, it was 4,000 people. It was much less the bureaucracy it is today. But I also learned some amazing skills that ultimately have served me incredibly well today. I worked with really amazing engineers and have really tried to build a culture that fosters innovation. That was a great experience. I had actually intended on staying at Google for a little bit longer, but I happened to sneak in to see this guy, Barack Obama, speak. He gave a talk at Google in November 2007 about how he wanted to take what we were doing at Google with evidence and science and feedback and data and bring that to the government. So that inspired me to join his campaign, started off as a volunteer. And that experience as the director of analytics for his campaign is what inspired my first company. I learned a really valuable lesson. It's really great to build a product that you wish you had. So Optimizely was the product I wish we had in the Obama campaign in 2008. I had an amazing experience there, grew that to about $120 million in annual recurring revenue and 450 employees, sold the company, and actually it was while running Optimizely, I had this experience of losing my hearing. So it was the decision to sell the company was in part this grass is greener feeling of there's something out there that I can build that can give us superpowers by using technology to really augment our biological limitations I founded this company before finishing selling the old one. So most people told me, take a break, take a vacation, but I was just so passionate and excited about pursuing this idea of taking technology and using it to give us superpowers that I just couldn't not do it.
Incredible. I'm starting to see a theme here of starting businesses to solve a real problem and need that you have in your life and in your career, which is really interesting. What was the biggest lesson that you learned in each of those jobs that you were in? The one at the Obama for America organization, and then also at Google, and then Optimizely as well.
So Google, I learned how powerful it is to enable engineers to communicate with code. I'll tell you a quick story. One of my cube mates when I was at Google, actually when I was an intern, before I was at PM, as a software engineer intern, his name's Kevin Gibbs. And we had at the time at Google this internal ideas page. It was called Ideas, Google Ideas or something. And so people could submit ideas, especially non-engineers could submit ideas for things they thought Google should build. And it was just a way to debate and discuss. And the basic problem was, how do you figure out how to actually help people learn how to write a good query? But people were searching for all kinds of things that weren't good queries. Somebody posted this idea, and he was just so fed up and frustrated with the debate that he just went into focus mode. For 2 weeks straight, he worked on a project and prototype and actually built what was then called Google Suggest, which is now autocomplete. Every browser has it, every phone has it, but it's the idea of auto-completing your query. And that watching that firsthand was so magical because it ended the debate. Ever since then, I've been on this mission to build products where you can iterate quickly through the feedback cycle of actual user feedback. Don't debate things endlessly, break down problems into small incremental steps, and then ship it and get feedback. So that was the biggest lesson I learned, is the power of communicating through code, not just endless debate. In the Obama campaign, I learned this kind of risk-reward mentality. David Plouffe, the campaign manager, had this mentality that when I joined the campaign, we were third in the polls behind Hillary Clinton and John Edwards. And he just assumed that, look, if we do everything the same way that everyone else does it, we're going to end up just how everyone expects, third. And so he had this willingness to take risks. And one of those risks, actually, funnily enough, was to use data to make decisions. This wasn't an obvious idea. Back then, it was like the grizzled, white-haired senior veteran who'd make the call on what the website should say and all that stuff. But because he wanted to do things a little differently, he was willing to do A/B testing, experimentation, and that really paid off, had a huge impact. So that risk-reward mentality I learned. And then Optimizely, just to wrap things up, the biggest lesson I learned was this meta lesson, which is, if I look back at the sort of key inflection points in the company, the things I regret most are the times where my gut said we should do A, and somebody else thinks we should do B, and maybe a board member or executive or somebody has a good argument, but they want to do B, but my gut says we should do A. And I go along with B because I hired smart people and we should empower them and make them have ownership. But then B turns out poorly. There's plenty of times where I want to do A and it turns out poorly. I don't remember any of them. All I remember are the times I went against my founder instinct, my gut, and it turned out poorly. And ever since I've looked at that and regretted that, I have made this promise to myself to have confidence in my conviction. If my gut says we should do A, even if everyone around me says we should do B, I follow my gut. And that took me a decade to learn, but now has served me incredibly well here at Rewind.
And so experimentation, A/B testing, it has a strong role in your career so far. I'm curious if you can dig into what Rewind, how it actually works, first of all, for anybody who hasn't used it. And then secondly, I'm curious especially, where does that experimentation DNA really fall into Rewind as well? It seems like a lot of your initiative and lessons learned in the past had to do with finding more clarity in uncertain scenarios and with unfamiliar situations. With Rewind, I think you're kind of doing the same thing, maybe not directly enabling A/B testing, but making it very easy to address those uncertainties.
I learned in the campaign the power of A/B testing. Obviously, using the scientific method, which is what A/B testing is, to make decisions works. It's really powerful. What I realized is the pain. To do an A/B test before Optimizing, we needed a developer, you needed a huge investment in professional services. And so we just took all the pain away and the value was always there. How do you make something that was a good idea but easier is a really good startup framework. So we started with that, and that was tremendously successful. And our success was entirely due to the power of the scientific method. I can't take any credit for inventing it. I maybe popularized it within marketing circles, but the power of that idea was pretty transformative. How it relates to Rewind, we definitely have a very data-driven approach. I would say we don't really dictate our decisions based off of data. It informs our decisions. We certainly view a lot of what we do as experiments. We don't view it as gut feel, intuition, ivory tower, let's just launch what we think we should launch and sit away. We're very out there. We're not shying away from feedback, from criticism. And we think that through that fire, we're able to build a much, much better product. We certainly have launched things that were bad ideas and replaced them and changed them. So we have definitely a willingness to put ourselves out there that probably is informed by this idea of A/B testing, of hearing and validating ideas, not just intellectually thinking about them, which, by the way, is one of Google's biggest mistakes. I saw a bad example of this at Google where Google definitely has this kind of ivory tower focus on the solution, not focus on the problem mindset. And that certainly hasn't served them well. If you look at the history of Google Glass or Google Buzz or Google Wave, all these products that were shut down, the fundamental thread that all of them have is this problem of technology in search of a problem. It's let's build something cool and then figure out how to use it later. And I think that's the sort of the opposite of what the A/B testing and sort of experimentation mindset recommends.
And what are some proxies or some rules that you use to validate whether you're solving for the problem and not necessarily building a solution to a problem that hasn't been realized yet?
The most important thing is to be honest with yourself. It's so hard as a founder or even as a technologist to divorce the sophistication of your solution from the value it creates. But the reality is they're completely independent variables. You can build the most sophisticated technology in the world that nobody cares about, or the simplest, dumbest technology that is just a thin wrapper that makes a ton of value. And so it's having this egoless approach to how you think about decisions. I highly recommend a book called The Mom Test. The subtitle is something like, How Do You Talk to Customers When They're All Lying to You? Which is the idea that if you go out and tell somebody, hey, this is my idea, what do you think? They're not going to be honest. They're going to stroke your ego. They're not going to tell you it's a dumb idea. To truly get truth and to understand whether something's a good idea or not, you have to be really careful and thoughtful about how you ask about it, how you validate it, and take your ego out of it and be willing to say, okay, it's a dumb idea, let's move on, not wed yourself to the first technically sophisticated thing you built.
That's a book that's been on my bookshelf for quite some time and needs to be read. But thanks for the reminder. I'm going to have to prioritize that in the reading list. Moving a little bit more into the product itself, so Rewind itself. Can you describe, and I know you described what the product is, but the problem that you're solving with Rewind in maybe a little bit more detail and your specific approach for solving that problem? Why you think that the specific approach Rewind is taking is the right way to solve that problem?
Yeah, the problem that we started with was the fact that 90% of memories are forgotten after a week. It follows what's called the forgetting curve. And not only that, but as we get older, our memory gets worse. Your memory typically peaks when you're 20 years old, and then every year thereafter it gets worse. It started with this really basic fact. Our memory is bad. Most people don't realize that. Most people think they have a pretty good memory, but they just don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they've forgotten. And it's only, and this is where the insight from the experience of wearing my hearing aid came in, which is when I first tried a hearing aid, the magic of being able to hear again was really cool, but the bigger insight I got was how bad it had gotten. It wasn't until I had gotten my hearing back that I realized how much I had lost, because it's this boiling frog thing where it just got worse and worse slowly over time. The same thing is true of memory. We don't realize how bad our memory is until you get it all back. The core problem was, how do we give people that same experience around memory, which we know is bad, that I had with a hearing aid when I first tried it? And that was what inspired the first version. The very first version was something that records your screen, stores it all locally, does optical character recognition, and you could rewind time. You could go back in time. If you have a weekly team meeting, you go back to, hey, what did we do last week? It shocked people at just realizing, wow, if there's actually a way to rewind time, in some ways it was opening an entirely new dimension of computing, which is time, then it gave them this aha moment, this window into, wow, my memory was actually quite worse than I thought. And now I need technology like this to really help augment my memory. Our hope is we're as ubiquitous as glasses are for vision or hearing aids are for hearing, but for memory instead.
And what are some of the technological breakthroughs that have really enabled a tool like Rewind to be something that is practically usable? I'm assuming there's been concerns around the computational resource required in order for something like this to work. Also, there's security concerns that I'm sure your team thinks a lot about. Curious to learn a little bit more about the technology breakthroughs that have really made a tool like Rewind more useful and practical for its users.
I'll give you 3 technology breakthroughs that we had to come up with, and I'll give you a bonus 4th one that we will come up with that hasn't been achieved yet. First was compression. How do you take everything you've seen, said, or heard and compress it so that you still have enough resolution and fidelity to make it useful, but not hog your hard drive? And so that was a big major breakthrough. Today, roughly about 14 gigabytes a month get used if you're using us actively all day. And that means basically you can just get a new computer when your old hard drive is used up. And not only that, but we're also eventually going to have end-to-end encrypted cloud solutions, so like for backup. So ultimately, the storage problem was solved. Like, how do we compress things? And not just compress things good enough, but do it in a way that's imperceptible. That's the hardest part. How do you do it in the background so it doesn't hog system resources? And there, frankly, we really relied on Apple Silicon. Apple Silicon wasn't around actually when we founded the company. In fact, we pivoted to what is Rewind once Apple Silicon became good enough to do compression all locally and imperceptibly. That was breakthrough number one. The other is being able to do optical character recognition imperceptibly. How do you take what's on your screen and figure out what all the words are so you can search it, use a large language model? That's another major breakthrough that needed to be done imperceptibly. Again, we're also relying on Apple Silicon quite a bit there. And then the third is transcription. How do you do that all locally? And there, we got very lucky. Both Apple Silicon and OpenAI released a model called Whisper that works entirely locally. And so doing all those things, it's like a balloon squeeze. We doing all those things locally. Every time you want to add a little functionality that has a cost to CPU, which has a cost to battery life. So the goal is, how do you get this trifecta? The best performance, the best imperceptibility, and the best battery life. And so that was the foundation on which Rewind has been built. And I said I'll give you a bonus fourth one. And the fourth one that is going to come, and it is inevitable, is moving from today we use GPT-4 for our large language model integration, which requires some of your data to go to the cloud. The future is local LLMs to do everything that GPT-4 does, but all locally. And then I think we truly have an incredibly amazing privacy-first solution that nothing ever leaves your device. You can turn your Wi-Fi off, it captures what you say, what you hear, it stores it, it compresses it, it OCRs it, it ASRs it, and you can ask any question locally. That is, I think, the trifecta, or the quadfecta. I hope nobody steals that idea, but I thought I'd share it with you first, because I think that's going to be the breakthrough that makes this ubiquitous.
Super interesting. I know there's a lot that we can dive into there. The part I'm especially interested to dig into is the AI aspect. So you mentioned hosting GPT-4 locally. So can you describe how Rewind leverages AI today?
It's funny how what's considered AI has changed. At one point, OCR was considered an AI technique, and I studied computer science and did an honors thesis in natural language processing back in 2005. And a lot of that is now no longer AI. That's just commonplace computer science or programming. But when you say AI, you probably mean large language models. So let me share how we use that. So we have a feature called Ask Rewind, where you can ask any question. And that question then uses the data of what's been collected in the past as part of the context window, or you can think of it as part of the prompt that gets sent to GPT-4. So for example, if I ask Rewind, write me an email to Sam Altman asking to catch up, it will find all of the references to Sam Altman in my past. It will find the text representation of those moments. For example, an email from Paul Graham to Sam Altman and to me in 2010, introducing ourselves, or introducing each other to one another. And then it will use the text of that as part of the context window so that when GPT-4 comes back with a response, it says, hey, Sam, great to meet you, or looking forward to reconnecting. We were introduced by Paul Graham in 2010, blah, 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 blah. So that's how we use large language models. And that is a perfectly applicable technology for local LLMs, because nothing needs to actually go to the cloud. It's all stored already locally. And so that makes it a much better privacy story.
Got it. I'm curious to learn a little bit more from a technical perspective how you're implementing these AI features. What does the stack look like for implementation, also for maybe monitoring, for A/B testing, if you're doing any of that at Rewind?
We have some basic monitoring. It's nothing super sophisticated. Something I recommend is every time GPT-4, or I should say every time our Ask Rewind feature generates a response, right afterwards we give you a thumbs up, thumbs down option, which has been really great for just improving the model and the quality and prompt engineering. That gives us also a heartbeat on how it's doing. And so that's something I highly recommend. And when you do a thumbs up, thumbs down, optionally, if you want, you can add qualitative feedback. You can include specifics that otherwise we wouldn't log, but you can say, hey, sure, I'm happy to share this with you just so you can improve the product. So that goes back to the mindset I learned from the campaign, and it goes sort of this fast iteration cycle and getting feedback and improving it. But honestly, we probably could be doing so much more there using the data we're already collecting. We're not really doing much A/B testing when it comes to the model we use or the prompt. A lot of that is just doing our best when we're focused on it, and then we move on to the next feature. So I'm sure there's more we could do there as well. We do use feature rollouts, which I think is a great way to keep your velocity and not expose everyone to all the features all the time. That's another thing I recommend.
Got it. And what are some of the big challenges that you're facing with implementing AI? And I use AI, just to clarify a little bit, I use AI for generative AI. Anything that was prior to this recent explosion in interest in generative AI, I just consider most of it machine learning. I guess parts of NLP would be considered AI. But when it comes to generative AI and Rewind, what are some of the pain points or some of the issues that you may have been experiencing? Or for the most part, is it working as expected without much hiccups?
Yeah, if I'm really honest, it is working so much better than I expected that I'm still not sure how it's able to do what it's able to do. This example I gave earlier around the Sam Altman example, that's a real example. And I couldn't understand how it was possible that a generative AI could be given the sentence from : Paul Graham to : Sam Altman to : founders at Optimizely.com, by the way, because this was sent to us when I was at Optimizely. And from that, infer that I was a founder of Optimizely, and that this was an email, and that this was the first introduction, and then come up with an email that says, hey, Sam, still, I don't really understand how that was possible. It's real, I saw it, I did the demo, but I'm still scratching my head, like, how is it possible that a large language, so I would say it's well above and beyond my expectations. Anything great about our Ask Rewind product, I give all credit to OpenAI. It's just incredible what the model can do, given very limited context. And that we just showed up in the right place at the right time. We showed up with the best possible data that you could put in the context window. They showed up with the most amazing reasoning engine. And then the two of them combined is what now makes us look good.
That first part where you're finding the right data to include in the reasoning engine as context, how does that look at Rewind? How are you making that part as effective as possible?
Yeah, that's a little bit of our secret sauce. It's not super sophisticated, but it does require a little bit of clever engineering to figure out what exactly to include in the context window. I'll say this got much easier for us when GPT-4 went from 3.5 to 4 and got 32,000 token context window. What that means in practice is now that we can include not just 10 rewind search results, traditional search results, but more like 100 traditional rewind search results. The necessity for ranking and relevance and choosing exactly the moments from your past that were relevant became less important because we could just put the top 100 as opposed to the top 10. Yeah, that's a little bit challenging, but it pales in comparison to the magic of what GPT-4 does.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears into the hot topic on Twitter right now. It's hard to go on Twitter without hearing about Rewind Pendant, which is the device that you released just a few days ago. Do you mind describing what Rewind Pendant is?
Rewind Pendant is a natural extension of what we've been working on now for a few years, which is to take what we think is incredibly valuable, which is everything you've seen, said, or heard, and extending it beyond just your devices. Today, we're on Mac, we're on iPhone, soon Windows, but there's so much more to life than what we do on our devices. And so this idea came from, what if we could take the real world, where you say things, where you hear things, you go to a conference, you've got back-to-back sessions, it's super interesting content, you're frantically taking notes, you want to share summaries with your coworkers, but you can only write as fast as you're able to listen, and even then you miss the important details. How do we take experiences like that and power it with the magic of what Rewind has already become? That's where the idea came from. I actually started, before even starting the company, I'd been playing around with hardware ideas for a while, ever since 2019. The timing was right. I'll admit, we rushed our announcement here because Humane had come out, and we definitely wanted to make sure we were able to put ourselves out there as a credible alternative. We do think our approach is significantly better than Humane's. We'll let the market decide, and it's really taken off. I think it's resonated in a way that, like, the use cases are so powerful that it really resonated. And it also just drawn some criticism, very fair criticism. What does this mean for people who you interact with? If you're wearing the pendant, how do you make sure the people you meet with aren't recorded without their consent? Our focus is how do we build a privacy-first product? And we think ultimately getting that right is what's going to make our product the winner in this category.
What is Rewind hoping to do differently than maybe Humane and the other competitors that might pop up from a privacy lens? Or do you think that everyone's going to go in the same direction and be operating in parity in regards to how they deal with the privacy concerns of these devices?
The first thing we're doing is really something we learned from Mac and iPhone, which is how important it is to store data locally. Most competitors, they take the easy and lazy path out and store things in the cloud, which makes it easy for them, but makes it much worse for a user. So to the extent possible that all the data that you have that ever is captured is stored somewhere, we want it stored in a way that only you have access. We don't have access to it as a company. Your employer doesn't have access to it. And so that's the foundation. That's when we say private by design or privacy first, that's like the basic ideas, like how do we store all locally? And as I said earlier, once large language models running locally are as good as GPT-4, which I think is inevitable, then that's going to be incredible. The second thing is we're thinking very hard about features that no one else has really been thinking about. Make it so that the experience for people who don't have the device is as privacy sensitive as possible. And I can share a bunch if you're interested. Maybe I'll just give you one. The first feature we're thinking about is making it so that the recordings, we only store the recordings of the user and anyone who has verbally opted in. And so using voice fingerprints and speaker diarization, it's possible to actually identify who actually is speaking, what they said. And if somebody hasn't said, sure, you can record me, then we don't store it. And if you play back the recording, it's as if they never said a thing. So that's just one example of the kind of features that if you took a very privacy-focused approach, I think would really differentiate this product. It's the difference between somebody wearing a Google Glass that captures everything versus a Google Glass just for yourself. And I think Google Glass really set the entire wearable industry back a decade because they were really cavalier about privacy, and we're going to do the exact opposite.
Got it. And is GPT-4 and on-prem LLMs, is that a blocker for something like Pendant achieving the type of market penetration that you're looking for? Or is there a world that you can introduce it without on-prem LLMs and then eventually move your way towards that direction?
I think it's very likely that we'll be able to launch it with local LLMs. There's still a ton to be done. And I'll be very transparent. We are very early in the development of the Pendant. And so it's going to be a while before we're at the point it reaches our internal bar of quality. And we have a very high quality bar for all the products, but especially this one. We think in order to get this right, we really need privacy to be locked in on day one. And so that's our focus. And we're not going to launch anything until we feel really good that this is a product that's going to be good for society, good for humanity, and generally something that we think will be as ubiquitous, as I said, as a hearing aid is for hearing and glasses are for vision.
What do you think is the key to success when rolling out something like Pendant? One, you're competing against other startups that are potentially going to compete directly with that product. The other 600-pound gorilla in the room is Apple, who may potentially consider rolling out similar features in the future. Everybody has an iPhone nowadays. I know they're definitely thinking about on-prem LLMs as potentially something they're going to roll out in the next year. Who knows? How do you compete with, one, the other startups that are looking to do similar things in the space, and then also incumbents who have massive distribution advantage like Apple has with devices?
I think about it in two different camps. The easier one is actually Apple. For better or worse, they have a huge innovator's dilemma. They have painted their entire brand around being the privacy-centered big tech company, and anything that could tarnish that brand is in direct odds with the sort of the core, what Tim has been saying for a while, what he said to Congress. So when the CEO of your company has to go back on something they've said to Congress, it's pretty unlikely you're going to do anything in that space for quite a while. I think it will happen. It's inevitable. Apple will absolutely compete with us. They will get into our space. And I think that's inevitable. Or what we're doing is a bad idea. One or the other. I don't think there's a scenario what we're doing is a good idea and Apple doesn't eventually do it. But I think we're years and maybe even a decade away before they actually make it a serious investment. So that's the easy one. Startups are a different story. And I think I've been through this before. With Optimizely, we had dozens of competitors, dozens of copycats. Already with Rewind, we're having, not the Pendant, but the Mac version, we're having tons of copycats. My playbook is pretty simple. Be obsessively focused on the user and build and innovate on their behalf. And as long as we're focused on the users, not our competitors, we'll win. We obviously will make mistakes. We're going to learn, we're going to iterate, but I don't see any other path than being more customer obsessed, more user obsessed than our competitors. And that's worked well for me in the past, and I'm confident it'll work well for me in the future.
Awesome. And what's your future vision and how does Rewind fit into it?
Our vision is to give humans superpowers. And that might sound lofty, but it's as simple as the experience I had wearing a hearing aid for the first time. It's the idea that our biology limits us. We are limited by our biology. And if we can think about ways that technology can augment our natural limitations, that is a superpower. And that's what we're doing. We think Rewind will be the first of many investments in that. We're obviously laser focused on what Rewind is today, but we hope in 10 or 20 or 100 years, if Rewind is still around, that people will think of us as the company that gave them superpowers. And we think, I'm incredibly optimistic. And I think most of the world is very cynical or pessimistic about technology and its role in giving us superpowers. But I can tell you, I learned a secret the day I tried a hearing aid that I think most people don't appreciate, which is the role technology can have in making every one of our lives better and giving us superpowers.
Do you have a way of framing how you think about what technology is able to augment versus what it may not be able to augment? More curious about the latter. How might you think of certain things that technology just may not be able to augment or may not be worth?
There's certainly a lot of things not worth trying, but I actually think the definition of technology is a lever. It is a way to do a thing that you were doing before, but better. The wheel is technology, the telephone is technology, the internet is technology, everything. Like before Google Maps, you had to remember cross streets. You had to get from point A to point B. Most people listening to this probably don't remember a world before Google Maps, but I remember. It was a pain. Your brain had to do a lot of things that today you don't have to do. You can use Google Maps. You put in a destination, it tells you how to get there, and you don't have to think about it. That's an example of augmenting our human capabilities, our natural limitations with technology. So I think there's nothing technology can't do, and I think everything that we do to make our lives better is what technology is.
Curious how dogfooding Rewind has impacted your ability to be an effective leader at the organization.
Rewind is kind of perfect for leaders. In fact, we see in our data that is the sweet spot for us, is founders and leaders of companies, in large part because they have such a big problem. Their challenge is they're context switching constantly. They're in back-to-back meetings. They're getting information from tons of different sources. That information is all trapped in silos. So from Dogfood and Rewind, I get the benefit of no silos. All of my data and all of my apps and all of my conversations on Zoom, on Slack, they're all in one place. So that's a huge advantage. The other part is my job is pretty simple, actually. At the end of the day, I'm synthesizing a lot of information. I make a couple of important decisions or decisions that are meaningful. And as long as I'm well-informed and I make those decisions using that, I don't let my ego or other cognitive biases get in the way. If you ask me what kind of job could get replaced by AI sooner than later, maybe CEO is pretty high on that list because it's such a perfect example of being able to use the kind of data that large language models consume so well. In fact, I'll even admit some of my hardest strategic decisions now, more often than not, I'll go to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what it thinks because it's obviously not too close to the problem. It's got a lot of context. And Rewind has been tremendous for that. Rewind is basically ChatGPT, but with all of my personal context, which is exactly what I need.
Hearing that's making me sweat a little bit, but it's also exciting. So what role are humans left with in a world where tools like Rewind are able to capture all the information that we normally would be collecting in our brains, and we have tools like ChatGPT and other AI tools that help us leverage those tools and transform them into practical tidbits or exchange of knowledge? What role are humans left with in that world?
Yeah, it's funny when you ask what role are humans left with. It reminds me of what people probably asked when electricity came about and somebody said, what role are lamplighters left with? There used to be a person, the guy from Mary Poppins, who'd go around and light lamps around the street. And that person's job went away. And to ask the questions has such a cynical view of the possibility for what human minds can do and what human minds are able to actually pursue, that I think, yeah, things will fundamentally change dramatically over the next few years. Probably half of jobs will go away. But for every one of those jobs, a better new one will show up. And people will continue to prosper. People will continue to consume. That's why I think I'm not worried about AI removing all jobs. Like our expectations will just go up. Just like today, one of the poorest people in America is probably living a better life than the richest American 100 years ago. We are going to all be better in 100 years, and technology will continue to pave that path. So I don't think there's a reason to think that just because AI can do a lot of things that seem like magic, that somehow today will be different. It's the exact story of the history of technology every single time a new piece of technology comes out. I think the role we'll play will continue to be better, more prosperous, happier, more fulfilled, and humanity, I think, is only going to benefit. I'm not a doomsday AI naysayer.
I couldn't agree with you more. I know the question may have come across a little cynical, but I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's only going to unlock more human creativity, and it's TBD exactly what it's going to look like, but it's definitely taken away a lot of the things that maybe aren't the best use of our mind share. And so how has Rewind helped you in your personal life outside of your job as CEO?
One of the first ideas for Rewind, as I mentioned before, was a wearable. And I pitched my wife on this idea, which is, hey, how'd you feel if I wore this microphone everywhere I go? And it captured all of our conversations. And I'll admit, I was terrified that she would hate it because now she knew that I could finally win an argument. But what was interesting, it was the exact opposite. She thought, oh, finally, Dan is going to hear me. Dan is going to be able to go back to what I've been saying, and he hasn't been processing or hasn't been capturing. And so she was the biggest fan of this idea of our relationship would be better if we actually were able to communicate better because we were able to actually capture what we're saying to one another. Not there yet with the pendant, maybe, but Rewind right now is really more business and productivity focused. But I'm convinced if we're successful on our journey of giving humans superpowers, it'll mean better relationships with our partners as well.
So after scaling a enterprise business and Wisely, how does it feel working on the B2C side?
I get asked this a lot. My last company was a B2B company and this one's B2C. I'll tell you, it is so much better in some ways and so much harder in others. The way I think about it is like a B2B business is like a startup on easy mode. A B2C business is a startup on hard mode. So it's not necessarily better, it's just harder, but the effort, you get a much larger return. Our market for our products are the billion knowledge workers on this planet. And Optimizely, ultimately, it wasn't for everyone. There's more for marketers at companies who care about their website. I think in that sense, the opportunity and the power of what we can do today feels so much more incredible. But it also means that the competition is fiercer. It means that there's greater challenges to distribution. You can't just pick up a phone and sell the product one by one. But personally, I'm a big fan. I think a lot of founders go on easy mode and try to focus on B2B companies, and they get advice to do that because that is easier. Maybe I'm lucky that I've learned so much from all the mistakes I made at my last company that's now served me well, and I can be more successful as a second-time founder doing startups on hard mode.
Dan, where can listeners learn more about you, about Rewind, and about Rewind Pendant?
You can learn more about Rewind by going to rewind.ai. You can download our Mac app today, no credit card required. Our iPhone app is in the App Store, and soon we will have a Windows app, so sign up on the waitlist at rewind.ai. You can also pre-order the Rewind Pendant at rewind.ai/pendant.
Thanks so much, Dan.
Thank you.